Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Story Studio. My name is Lindsay Cuyava, and I am the Senior Programming Manager at CGI and have put this all together. We are thrilled. This is a very new thing for us, and so we appreciate you taking the time to come and hang out with us. So because this is new, a little bit of information. So Story Studio is really built off of President Clinton's very, very big passion of stories. And so we created this event as a part of CGI to really highlight that and bring that to fruition. And so over the next 45 minutes, you're going to be hearing some really incredible stories that hopefully inspire you and encourage you to take these ideas and put the ideas of CGI into action after you leave the meeting. So, without further ado, I am very honored to introduce you to our host of the Exploration and Understanding event. She is the UNFPA Goodwill Ambassador, Ashley Judd.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really good to be in community with you here at the Clinton Global Initiative's inaugural Story Studio. Yes, and as Lindsay said, I am Ashley. And some of you know that I've been telling stories and films and plays since my first movie, Ruby in Paradise, won the Sundance Film Festival 29 years ago. Wow. And just as, if not more importantly, I have been sitting in fellowship with girls and women around the world, 22 countries now, in places like brothels and refugee camps and HIV/AIDS hospices and orphanages and on the streets and in drop-in centers, hearing their sacred stories, which they have entrusted me, and with their permission, then sharing them with the world, because stories are a preternatural part of who we are. And so today, this afternoon, we have the opportunity to turn off those devices, drop into a sacred listening place, and soften our ears and our souls, and let these stories remind us that they transmit knowledge and wisdom, they transmit culture, and they ignite our outrage against injustice. And they also are critically sources of renewal and resilience and hope. So for our first such story, we're going to meet an extraordinary woman from Asia. She's from Afghanistan, Sara Wahedi. And Sara started the first ever civic technology startup, Ehtesab, and she is going to fill us with her courage and inspire us to care about what is happening with her people. So come on up, Sara. It's such a delight to introduce you.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ashley. It's an absolute honor. What most Afghans will tell you is that our lives as Afghans are composed of life-altering moments that can be both joyous and heart-wrenching. On May 8th, 2018, I experienced the latter. At that time, I was working at the office of the President of Afghanistan. I didn't use bulletproof vehicles or official transport, which became a running joke with my colleagues. Let's just say I don't like protocol. Living with my grandparents in Kabul's rural neighborhoods, I was always humbled to remember why I was working back home. Anything which isolated me versus my community was dangerous, because the reality of my work was starkly different from what was actually happening on the ground. I wanted to see the daily hustle and bustle of the city center, meet Kabul residents, ask about their daily frustrations, and listen as much as I could. It was during one of those very familiar walks on my way home that my life changed forever. A few moments from turning onto my street, I heard screams about a vest. Seconds later, a deafening sound shook the ground beneath my feet. I looked back and saw a plume of fire and smoke, a mushroom cloud reaching far into the sky. 2 back-to-back suicide attacks organized by ISIS attacked the Indian visa office. It took 12 hours for the army to infiltrate and disarm them. The entire ordeal was visible from my balcony. Those suicide attacks forever impacted the lives of people who would become family to me. The cart owner I visited daily for fried bread, and the shop owners who had had their businesses destroyed. We were under lockdown in our homes until the next day, waking up to an eerily silent street. I asked a taxi driver if he knew the number of the police department in our district. He responded with a shrug. I asked a friend if he knew who to contact about the loss of electricity. He didn't have an answer for me. After several similar interactions, I wondered why we didn't have an efficient method to contact city officials or a means through which Kabul citizens could be informed of security alerts or other important updates in the city. A city, in fact, which has been crippled by over 2 decades of war, with over 6 million people consistently left in the dark of what was happening around them. I spent the next day sleepless, bursting with ideas on how to bridge the communication gap between citizens and city officials. Ultimately, I founded a startup called Ehtesab, a mix of Dari and Pashto words which mean accountability. From July 2018, our team of 3 has expanded to a team of 20 just days before the Taliban takeover. We haven't had a day off since the fall of the country. While everyone left and literally logged off from Afghanistan, Ehtesab has stood firm on its mission. We anticipated only being able to continue operations until a few months after the Taliban takeover, but we've pushed through. Under the veil of WhatsApp and data packages, the Ehtesab team continues to watch over Kabul, providing any sigh of relief for its users, to know that they can trust our verified near real-time alerts. With the support of our users, we've been able to send over 90,000 security and city service alerts in the last year. It's still not widely known that access to information is now a universal right entrenched in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. It's a right that helps to ensure transparency in government and protects citizens in their right to access information that pertains to their universal rights. It's something we take granted for in the West. Accessing 911 in a time of need, contacting municipal officials on issues related to civic services such as electricity and everything in between. For many countries across the globe, this privilege is nowhere near the periphery. That's why for a country like Afghanistan, where promise after promise has been broken, collaboration is catharsis, and that collaboration has been Ehtesab. Citizen engagement, collective accountability, robust access to information, these are the fundamental building blocks to the Afghanistan of tomorrow. Thank you.
Wow, Sara. Thank you so much for that. I mean, obviously there's tremendous courage in your story, but there's also that simplicity of having such a damaging and frightening experiencing and seeing a gap in public services, a sleepless night, and then deciding you will be the person who's accountable to take that action. Can you tell us a little bit more about that sleepless night?
Of course. So, I mean, it was unprecedented. I had never obviously experienced something like that, but obviously you see things about explosions on the news. You don't expect it to be in front of you, and it was literally like a TV moment. What kind of shocked me was just the state of numbness that comes on you, where you don't really know what to do. And for a city like Kabul, where we were having an average of 3 to 4 explosions a day in 2018, it made me wonder, how do we even go on? How do we move on? So it felt like, obviously in your youth, you kind of have more of fight or flight moments. So I felt like it was time for me to step up and do what I could.
And it's so in the spirit of CGI to then take that individual experience and harness into collectivity and then turn it into this wonderful public good. So thank you so much. And how can a room like this support you? Because I know we all want to.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, anyone who is passionate about civic technology, accountability, who's a leader in tech, feel free to reach out. I'm here. You can definitely come up and we can chat, or just reach out to the Ehtesab team. So yeah, thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Sara Wahedi, the great and good. And I hope we all have moments like that where we turn that despair, that gift of despair, into something that is tangible, and she even used the word cathartic, where we don't allow it to transform us into agents of laxity, but into agents of something that can be harnessed into transformative public good. So now we're going to travel, we're going to explore and use our imaginations and go from Afghanistan to the Central African rainforest, sub-Saharan Africa, and we're going to meet the least known of our closest living relatives, the bonobos. We have all women up here except for one guy. We might call him the man of the hour. And he is a professor of human evolutionary biology at Harvard. He studies the bonobos, who are the least known, least studied, and least funded of the primates. I happen to hold him in high personal as well as professional regard because he is my partner. So please welcome to the stage Martin Surbeck.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm admittedly a bit nervous now to step up here.
Yeah,
I'd rather be in the rainforest, in the swamp, I guess.
What a compliment to all of us. Yeah, it's definitely not your ecosystem. Well, one of the things about your ecosystem is Martin once saved me from a rhinoceros viper snake, for which I remain grateful.
Yeah, you might have to save me from some head of state or people like that tonight.
I will do that very gladly. So if this isn't your native environment, and Switzerland is from where you hail, and you grew up rock climbing and mountaineering and ski touring, how does a boy like you become a man in the Central African rainforest? There's got to be a story there.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it was not a straight line. I think, I always liked to hang out around animals and be with animals, and together with some taste for adventure and really some, I think fascination for other cultures. I did my master's thesis in India, working on social insects. So I'm a biologist, and I really discovered my passion to understand social structures and what shapes them and what forms them in animal societies. And then working in Tunisia on ants, and in Mauritania ringing birds in the Saharan desert, I kind of stumbled over this announcement of they looked for somebody to set up a research camp and to habituate bonobos in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I thought, I didn't know much about bonobos at that time. I knew they're our closest living relatives. I knew that they have a lot of sex. And I thought of the birds and the ants, that might be, an interesting change. And I thought as well, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to visit such a place, right? And little did I know, that it became a lifetime thing. So since 20 years, I'm basically studying the bonobos in DRC.
Cool.
Yeah, so maybe, that's my story to the Congo. Maybe you fill us a bit in how you ended up on that plane in 2018, to the research camp that everybody can see here on the screen.
Yeah, that's the Kokolopori camp there in the rainforest. And just to be clear that we understand your personality, you went to a failed state that's politically unstable with civil wars in the east, where malaria is endemic, and there's a rainy season where your sleeping bag stays wet. So we understand you. I started going to DRC in 2008 to do public health and sexual and gender-based violence work, and I found it a very devastating place, but also a place to which I had to return. And then when I was doing my master's degree at Harvard, I took a class called Gender Violence, Law, and Social Justice, which I found emotionally very difficult, and the professor knew we needed some relief from how bad male entitlement to female bodies really is, and so she brought in bonobos to give us some hope, because the science shows that bonobo society is undergirded by female alliances, which make bonobo society egalitarian and matriarchal. And from that, we took some evidence that perhaps we men and women can do our business a little bit differently. And then she introduced me to this renowned anthropologist who said, hey, you're a bonobo. And I said, hey, I've been called a lot of things, especially after the Women's March. And he said, you need to go to the DRC to see them in the wild. And I thought that was a great idea, not knowing that fewer non-natives have been there than have been to outer space. And so the next thing I knew, it was 2018. I was sitting on a bush plane in Kinshasa, ready for this treacherous journey, and I was sitting behind.
Yeah, I mean, just to put something straight, right? I mean, Kokolopori, the research project, is a serious research project. Normally no tourists come to visit, and I mean, there I heard an American film star will come to visit, of whom I never heard before. With a film team, and I kind of was, like a unique opportunity, because, doing that work always also needs some public attention and financement, but I was just afraid everything will be in pieces when you leave, and so that's why I was on that plane.
Yeah, actually, he was going to run roughshod over and ruin the place. So enough about us. Let's talk about
Yeah,
the bonobos.
let's talk about the bonobos.
So
you
yes.
came in 2018 and you saw the bonobos for the first time. You know, they live in very remote parts, and maybe tell us, what do you think is the coolest about them?
That's the coolest thing about the bonobos, is that the females are free from male sexual violence. I mean, hands down. And so when I'm walking in the rainforest under this majestic canopy of trees, or, you know, my rump is on the forest floor leaning against this fabulous tree, and I watch a female and she's up in a branch, maybe eating some colorful fruit that's dribbling from her mouth, or she's dangling her arm playing with her young, a male may decide he wants to copulate with her. And he will approach her soliciting, and she seemingly registers this and processes whether or not she wants to copulate at that moment. And if she decides, no, not interested, he just ambles away. You know, and this is revolutionary to witness, because as a woman who was molested by a man for the first time when I was 7, and talked to a friend last week who said, oh, he bought me tickets to the comedy show and then paid for my dinner, and I had compliance sex with him because I didn't know what would happen if I didn't. This is just unbelievable. And so what I love about Kokolopori is that this groundbreaking, world-leading research comes out about why this is the case. So please tell us a little bit about the science.
Without being too sciencey, I guess. Okay, so I think the main, or one very essential thing, is that the bonobo females, through their sexuality, they can maintain reproductive autonomy. You know, and that really changes the way that males compete over the access to females. So instead of investing into aggressive, you know, let's say strategies to access females, they really have to be nice, you know, and so that's one thing, and the other thing is, you know, you mentioned female alliances, and I think in many animal societies we see female alliances, but they mostly are restricted to relatives. So female help relatives, and they help their very close friends. Now in bonobos that's a bit different. Bonobo females somehow they opportunistically support other females. They form these coalitions. Sometimes nearly including all the females in the whole community, and that is potentially, or that is a very important factor that contributes that females in bonobo societies, they have very high ranks. And again, you know, males then against the higher ranking female, they don't, it's really not a good idea to be aggressive, you know, they you know, cut themselves in their foot.
So this is what I'm hearing is music to my ears. Females have reproductive autonomy, and females make alliances whether or not they are related, whether or not they know each other, and whether or not they even like each other, which is an invitation to me to evaluate my own behavior in my female sisterhood. So tell us a little bit more about the science.
Yeah, so at Kokolopori, we follow 3 different groups, no, on a daily basis, and we know by now each of these groups have their particularities. Do I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, they have their own culture, and when they come together, it's really not like in chimpanzees that they're kind of this permanent hostility, you know, that we see these intergroup killings, or, you know, what I think is fair to say, warfare between communities. But in bonobos, these communities come together and they hang out together for days up to weeks, and they intermingle. And what we see very interestingly, again, is these female alliances that not only span within, you know, they not only are important within the groups, but they really, you know, connect different groups. So these relationships are the one that cross borders in this species.
Yeah, and there's no recorded example of infanticide or homicide amongst bonobos, but in chimpanzees, somebody loses a life or at least a finger. I mean, it's not pretty when they come together. So that's just a tiny glimpse of the science that comes out of Kokolopori, and there's more. And Martin established they have culture. You can go to Google Scholar; he's amazing. And that's a little bit of the what. So tell us some of the how, because as we've alluded to, this is a very difficult place to get to, and it's an exceedingly difficult context. So how in the world do you pull this off?
Yeah, I think the main issue, it's very remote, and there's, I would say it's fair to say, complete lack of law enforcement. And so all our, you know, working there just means we have to work very close with the local population, or in very close collaboration. We work in the forest of 5 villages, and roam in their traditional forests. We co-use this forest, so the people, they collect mushroom, they collect caterpillars in those forests, which is the main source of income in the region. We create a small economy by employing local trackers to work with us, you know, in just very close collaboration. And on top of that, we invest into we help, you know, people that are not directly profiting maybe from the project by helping the 5 villages to build their own schools and kind of invest into their next generation.
With scholarships for girls.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so that's kind of my side. So maybe tell us, if you're there, do you only lean against trees in the forest, or is there maybe
And
a
take
bit more
baths,
to that?
languorous baths in the river, which is very beautiful. When Martin founded the research camp, he just walked around, found a flat place with a great river. That was the criteria for, and of course where bonobos were hooting. No, I mean, I care very much about the bonobos, but I also love the people very deeply, and it's difficult because the folks of Kokolopori live at the ragged edge of extreme poverty, and suffering is endemic. They eat 1 meal a day. Everybody stays pretty sick. And women in particular have very low status, as do the girls. I mean, the girls don't participate in public life. They're already conditioned just not to even try. And I'm a woman's woman, but I don't know the women of Kokolopori, because they're always at the river hauling water, they're in the forest foraging, gathering firewood, or they're shut away over smoking fires, minding lots and lots of children. And maternal mortality is very high. Our friend Bongi, his wife has lost 3 children in childbirth, and that's pretty average. And infant mortality is high. And so with UNFPA, with whom I work, the UN Agency for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights and Women's Rights, we just came in with the permission of the tribal chiefs and clan elders with some possibility, if that's what the villagers wanted, to have family planning, birth spacing, planning family size, and also installing a maternal health clinic. And that's what the villagers wanted. And so with listening circles and sharing circles and all totally around what they express their desires are, we are starting a family planning clinic. We are making maternal health available, and it's just the beginning of the story, but it's a good story so far, but it's all based on what they say they need and want. Yeah. So what's next for Bonobo Science? What are the big dreams for Kokolopori with you and the research assistants?
Yeah, I think you know, on the close run, we just want to understand a little bit more about the diversity within the species, and I think that really the thing we want to understand in the next 5 years is what set them on such a different trajectory than the chimpanzees. Now, we have these 2 species very closely related, but really contrary in many aspects. I mentioned the between group relationships, and you know, we talked about male-female relationships, and just to understand what really made the difference, right, in their evolution. That's one thing. And I think the greatest thing is, I work at Harvard at the moment at the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology. I still have a hard time kind of get that straight. But we have to think about, you know, how we became humans. And I think it's fair to say that the current state, what is kind of try to explain how we became humans from chimpanzees. No? So the chimpanzee model is very prominent in our telling of how we became humans. And it's fair to say that bonobos are equally close related to humans. So there is actually also a bonobo model for human evolution. So this story can really, or should be told as well in a different way, in an alternative way. So I think that's going to happen in the next years.
Yes, thank you. So, yeah. So, you know, everyone knows chimpanzees and holds them in this fond regard, and 100% of all female chimpanzees are severely sexually coerced and dominated by males. And bonobo females live free from that. And bonobos show us that male dominance and sexual violence is not evolutionarily inevitable. So they fire our imagination, and they ask us a fundamental question: who do we want to be? So thank you so much for being so attentive to our talk. We're passing around a card that has the Kokolopori website. If you want to learn more, go on to it, and we would love to have your support. Thank you so much. You can go back to your swamp.
I gladly retire.
So thank you for sharing so much. That's a big part of my life that no one really knows about. That's also where I broke my leg in 4 places and paralyzed my foot, where it took 67 hours to get help. And I learned that that's one of the reasons why local infrastructure for healthcare systems is so important. And it's my Congolese brothers and sisters who absolutely saved my life. I would be a dead woman without them having carried me out of the forest. So next we're going to go to, because a healthy organism needs 2 lungs, the other lung of the planet, the Amazon, where the great and good Helena is going to talk to us about her work after COP25 failed. And she, with her cohort, rose up to talk about polluters out. So please welcome to the stage, Helena Gualinga. Gualinga, thank you so much. Please fire us up.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. So I want to take you to the place where I live and where I grew up. And I want to tell you about what my morning looks like in my community. We usually wake up around 4 a.m. in the morning, before the sun is rising, and the entire extended family sits down around a fire. So before we collect the wood and set up the fire, and we sit around it, and everything from storytelling by my grandmother or my grandfather or the elderly is happening, some gossiping, but even political conversations, debates, decision-making. If someone in the family did something wrong, we have conversations about that. And this is where we solve issues. This is where we identify issues. This is where we laugh and spend time together, kind of as maybe you would do at a dinner, but we do this at 4 a.m. with the only light coming from the fire. And when this is done, and while we do this, we drink this tea, which is called wayusa. And each and every morning, we mix wayusa with another leaf or bark or a plant. And every morning, it's a different medicine. So every morning, we drink a different kind of plant medicine. And when we're done with that, and it's becoming a little bit lighter, maybe 5 a.m., 6 a.m., if it was a lot of gossip, I at least would walk to a little creek behind my house, and I walk barefoot there. And usually in the morning, when it's going to be a really sunny day, it's kind of chilly and you can feel the humidity of the rainforest. And I would walk there barefoot. I always had and have my dog with me, and the creek behind my house is really cold, so this is the best way to start a day in the Amazon, really fresh, because you know that there's a long day ahead of you, very sunny and very hot. My name is Helena Gualinga. I'm 20 years old, and I come from the Quechua people of Sarayaku in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And what I was telling you about is a very sacred experience, but also a very sacred place to me. It's where my ancestors have been for hundreds and thousands of years. It's where I grew up. It's where I have my family. And it's the land that shaped me. But for as long as I can remember, this place has been threatened, specifically by oil companies. So from around the year that I was born, my community was part of a 10-year legal process to kick out the oil companies from our territories because the government had given them permission to come and drill oil. And my community opposed that because we had seen what had happened to neighbor communities that had not been able to kick them out or that did not have a say in that decision making. Because we saw oil in their waters, oil in their rivers, toxic waste filling up their land, children being born with cancer. And that's the reality of some parts of the Amazon and a lot of places where oil has been drilled. So because of that, 10 years later, my community took the Ecuadorian government to court, to International Human Rights Court, and won. And this was a landmark victory for indigenous people's rights, not just in Ecuador, but across Latin America. But if you think about it, I didn't, when I was growing up, I only spoke Quechua. I did not speak English or Spanish. And I always heard the word desarrollo, which means development in English. So my association with development was always that. It was the persecution that my family had to go through while we were opposing the oil company. It was the defamation by the government. It was the attacks from government and oil companies. And it was the torture by military. And the oil that I knew that other communities had in their water. That was development. So when I grew up and I realized that that's not what development should look like, or that's not what it's supposed to look like, I realized that we need to redefine what development looks like, because that is not development for anyone. So if we go back to my morning in the Amazon before the sun rises, when I'm drinking the tea with my family, when I go to the river, with modern development, I would have never even been able to have that experience, which for me is very, very special. Because instead of only having the light of the fire, I would have just had a lamp. Instead of gathering the wood, I would have just had a stove. Instead of mixing leaves and barks, different ones every morning, I could have just had a produced pack of tea in the morning. Instead of walking to the river with my dog and feeling the land with my feet, I would have just been able to go and take a shower. So that is how different my experience would have been if development would have been implemented in my community. And when I say this, especially in my own country, I hear that, well, you indigenous people, you are against development. You don't want the rest of Ecuadorians to progress or to, develop our country. And I would say, well, first of all, this is what happened to indigenous territories is definitely not development. But we also need to look at development in a different way. We need to, especially as the climate crisis is literally happening right now on our territories, it's coming in the forms of huge floods that we've never seen before, drought, food insecurity. We need to go back to indigenous ways. We need to go back and reestablish the balance. We need to reestablish the balance between human and nature. We need to learn from indigenous people of how that balance has been maintained. Because today we are obsessed with this fantasy of eternal economic growth, and we want growth over stability. And why cannot our ambition or aspiration be enough rather than richer, and a good life rather than a richer life? Why do we have to have growth instead of stability and balance? So we can learn that from indigenous people. And there are two things that I want you to take away from this. One thing is that my community, there are thousands of communities like that all over the world that have been protecting the rainforest, different ecosystems, lands. And my community back then was a people of 1,000 people. And we were able to protect, and we still are protecting, 140,000 hectares of pristine rainforest. And that rainforest today would not have been there without my people, without indigenous people. I would not have had that experience that I had when I can walk and feel the land and feel the forest and feel the humidity of nature and how it touches my body. The second one is that me being here speaking is not the most important part of my work. It's not what's essential to the Amazon. What's essential to us is being there, being on the ground, still maintaining our Indigenous values, our lifestyles, spend time with my family, spend time with my peers that are protecting the Amazon rainforest with their own bodies sometimes. That is what's the most important part of my work for me. So I want to ask you, what's your most important work in this life? Thank you.
Helena Gualinga, ladies and gentlemen. I am in awe of you. I'm really in awe of you. And I think that we should let her talk stand as it is. I think you've really said it all. Unless I would simply ask if you have a message for the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, because there's a piece of information that perhaps not all of us in this room know about from whence the energy in California comes.
Yes, well, because we have oil companies in the Amazon, we really did feel the need to trace where this oil was going. And unfortunately, most of it is going to the state of California. 80% of the Ecuadorian oil is going to the state of California, and 50% of the Amazon oil is also going to California. So yeah, there's also, you know, a way to pressure over here to make that stop, because if there's a demand, they still need to take out oil from where I come from. But there is something I can share that is really, really important. It's a big part of my life, and the reason why I think that Indigenous people have done this work. I was just telling you about, you know, the connection and stability and balance that we have been able to maintain with nature. And in my community, we have this philosophy of Kausaksacha and the living forest. So we view everything in the forest as living. And we do not just see a lagoon, we see a living being when we see a lagoon. When we see a forest or a river or a waterfall, we see that as living beings. And this is a fundamental part of our mindset that just naturally makes us want to protect nature, because we do feel that we are part of nature, and we do not see these beings as being something opposite to us. And this might, I remember someone once said, like, this sounds like nonsense to me. And it might sound like nonsense, but if you like numbers and statistics better, you can see that where this philosophy is, where the cultures that have similar philosophies and mindsets to my people, those are the areas where forests and waters are protected. So if we want to protect forests and water, and we want to protect the planet, that is the mindset that we need to go back to again, go back to those Indigenous ways of thinking, because if not, we will end up digging our own grave, which we already are doing.
Thank you so much, Helena. The voice of the people of Quechua of Sarayaku in Ecuador, Sara Wahedi, chosen by Time Magazine as one of the 100 future leaders, obviously, with good reason. Thank you all so much for being a part of Story Studio today. I hope these have touched your heart as they have mine. And please take them with you and transition gently into the world that's out in that corridor. And enjoy your lunch and each other. Thank you so much. God bless.
Oh, no, no.